Hi guys. Can we sit in front just for the pictures, but also like to make it look fuller? Upstairs we will be having at the rooftop. Emma Pringle will be speaking, and down here is Rudy. So can we please move this side? Hi guys, did you enjoy your lunch? Okay, guys, can see smiling faces. Um, for our next speaker, it's Rudy Merriday. She's a seasoned front-end developer, speaker, conference organizer, and dedicated mentor. Known for crafting engaging digital experiences for clients worldwide, she's passionate, extends beyond development to empowering the next generation of front-end engineers. Through mentorship and coaching, she inspires aspiring developers to unlock their potential and build standout projects. Can we please give Rudy a round of applause? Enjoy the talk.
Hi folks, how are you guys doing? Good. So thank you so much for coming and having this time with me. I have been watching a lot of talks as well, and I've learned so much from all the people who are sitting here. So I hope that you coming here and experiencing this space with me also teaches you something. So there is all of that introduction. I do stuff, and you already heard all the stuff. And if I'm not doing that, I'm doing a really stellar subpar job at being a social media influencer. So if you want to grab me in those spaces and follow me, as people say, please do that. I really appreciate it. Cool. This is what we came here for. Right? 6 things making your tests slower, flaky, and hard to maintain. I do take this talk very seriously, so don't be thrown with these comic letters that I've used. There's a reason for this. I have a flow that I'm going to go through with the 6 things that I want to share with you, but I'm going to be going through a series of examples, so I want you to know which one falls in 1 or 2 or all of these categories. So I'm hoping that this kind of grabs your attention, because I'm going to put it at that top left corner there for you to see, but we're going to be going through some examples. Cool. This is a GDG conference after all, so how many of you actually use Angular to build your projects? I apologize. And I heard that Angular comes with Angular core testing out of the box with Karma. We are not going to use that. So how many of you actually know or use Jest and testing library to test your front ends? All right, cool. So I'm going to try to explain as much as I can when we get there. But this is what we're going to use as our tech stack. I don't really do a lot of Angular examples, but at least the testing library rendering part is in Angular. But mostly it's going to be Jest and testing library. So I hope we are all comfortable with that. Cool. Now the grand reveal of the 6. The 6 things that I think are making your test slower, flaky, and hard to maintain. This obviously is based on my experiences and my opinion. I am very interested in you challenging my thinking and challenging the examples that I show you. So let's have a conversation after this. Number 1, unclear descriptions. Now, we are lazy engineers, lazy professionals. And that's encouraged, right? We want to be, because we want to automate things and all of that. Now, if a test fails, I don't know about you, but the first thing I try to do is figure out what is actually failing and meet the description. Now, I don't want to figure out what's failing by reading how you set up your test. So the better your descriptions are, I think the easier it makes my life, right? Because the brain also tries to create shortcuts when it reads things or try to find things. And so the more descriptive you are, it's easy for me to understand why you're doing that test and what's actually failing. So that's number one for me. Number two, too many expect in a single test. Now this one is controversial because even the creator of testing library does not believe the way I think. So I'll be interested to see how you guys think about this. Third one, using incorrect selectors, events, and matches. I'm going to explain what those three things are. Number four, testing the wrong stuff. It's a really hard one to gauge that one. Like, what is the wrong thing to test? So we're going to explore that. Number five, not refactoring your tests. Tests are code too. So you need to give it the same level of care that you do with your component code. And then the last one, not learning your testing libraries or whatever tooling that you're using to do your test, because the more you discover about that tool, the better you are at using it the best way you possibly can. So that's the 6, folks. Like, we're done. At this point in time, if you want to go, it's all great, but I implore you to stay. Cool. Number one. So we are all eager engineers, right? We write our tests first before we write our components, right? So when you're so eager, one of the red flags that you might encounter is like not wanting to write a description at all because you're so excited about writing the test, right? So you skip the chance of actually providing a useful description like food. I hope this is visible. Yeah, clear enough, right? Cool. Providing food as a description to your tests, right? And the person who's probably going to review your code doesn't think of tests as first-class citizen like you do, so, and it's the people not in this room, and they will skip the fact that you just used food as a description. Fast forward 2 months later, a test fails, and you read the description and it says food. I don't know the joy that overcomes you at that point in time as you try to decipher what foods actually is. So, if you can try to avoid that, please do. The next one is should ensure that a functionality is robust and user-friendly. Now, if you listen to that English, it makes sense, right? Functionality is robust and user-friendly, but let's just break down this English a little bit. What is functionality in this use case? Like, how would I know by reading your description what functionality is? Let's take a logging in example. Is functionality that I'm typing into an input, clicking a button, navigating somewhere? I'm a front-end developer by profession. Chances are when a user has logged in, you want to change the screen, show an account link or profile or whatnot. What's the functionality we are testing here, right? Robust. Like, I'm a co-organizer of a conference called, or a meetup called Jersey.js. Lucky Nkosi was presenting about testing a couple of days back on Thursday. And we laughed at the word robust. What does robust mean? Is it, can withstand traffic? Is it performant? What is robust? What is user-friendly? Is it how the button or the input is positioned in the layout? What is it? So when I look at this, I have to go into the details of this test to figure out what exactly is going on in this test. So if you can, try to avoid this. What I do instead is I have a parent describe that highlights what the test or the component that I'm trying to test. And then I try to find a really good job at grouping things together so that it makes sense to the person who's going to read my test, or at least a future version of me, right? So, for example, here I put in, let's say I have a series of things that I want to test when the feature flag is on. That's exactly what I'm going to do here, create another branch or nested describe that actually helps me collect and bundle my tests together. When this thing fails, folks can see at the bottom here, it will give me a breadcrumb of exactly what is being tested so that I can get there. My brain is happy when I look at this because I can follow exactly what is going on without actually looking at how the test is being described. So look forward to examples like these. Cool. So a lot of things that you probably don't know about me is that I got my braces about 2 weeks back. So I'm saying this not necessarily because I want you to know a lot about me, but I want to apologize to the people who are sitting in front for the rain because I'm still trying to figure it out. And I apologize to everybody else who's in this hall because there's a lot of puns and crazy things that I'm going to say and pictures of our teeth that you are going to see. So it is going to seem a little bit like a dental commercial. I apologize for that. Cool. Next example, the second problem is too many expects in a single test. Now, this is where the things get a little bit wonky, right? If you started testing a long time ago like me, so I'm old, and you probably heard the principle that you should have a single expect for every test, right? Perfectly good thing for one to do, right? But then, Kent C. Dots, the creator of testing library, initially created for React, and then dubbed for Vue and Angular. So like testing library is quite big in the front-end testing community, right? He says that it's rare if you are going to put in like your username and your password and click a button for you to think of that as an isolated event because it's a single flow. So it makes sense for you to put an expect like this, right? Because you are saying you are putting input data in an input, you are clicking a button. These things are not isolated, right? I have tested a lot. So tell me if ever this resonates with you. Have you ever tested or run a single test and it passes, but then fails as part of a whole, right? Because either there's some state that's not being reset and all of that stuff. So our tooling result tries to be as useful as it possibly can to tell us when something is wrong. But we have seen things like this, right? Where like it does its best job to tell you that, hey, there is a problem, but points to a place that you don't even know or complains to a line that's not the problem, right? Now you need to start debugging and fishing out what exactly is going on. I typically would start commenting out tests, right? To see exactly which ones that are influencing one another. And then maybe at some point you narrow it into some like 2 tests or so that might be affecting each other. And then 2 of those tests look like this. The next thing that you're going to do is start commenting out all of these expects to see which one actually influences one another, right? And that's 15 minutes of your life gone. And I feel like there's a way for us to not necessarily use 1, but maybe 3, and not 7 of expect to kind of bundle your logic, right? So maybe inputting into the test, like the inputs to put your username and your password is one test, and maybe triggering an async event is another. There's a way for you to maybe try and find a way to not have 7 expects, but at least 2. So I implore you to maybe do something like that to make your life a little bit easy. If it's not just for you in the future when you're trying to debug what's going on. Cool. Then the next one, which me and Kent seem to agree on, is having too many expects in a wait for. Now, what is a wait for? A wait for is a function that we use to capture something that is async or is going to happen in a non-deterministic time. So if there's some DOM manipulation and then like a button shows up, or like we are calling an endpoint and then something happens. So when you want to assert that that thing has happened, we would put it in a wait for. Now, in this example, there's an await for that checks if ever a text box is visible. And then there's another one that checks if ever an endpoint is called. If at any point in time when these tests are executed, we already know that we are not calling this endpoint once. We would have to wait for this whole async situation to happen for us to get that feedback. So if you want to try to avoid doing that, or if you don't want that to happen, then do something like this. Capture one of the things that you know are going to happen in an async way, and then take out all aspects after that. Because after this line, anything that happens here has already taken into consideration that the async event has happened. Does that make sense? Cool. Then we get to number 3. Using incorrect selectors, events, and matches. Selectors are your get bys, find by, query by, when you're trying to look for something in your DOM element. The events are your types, your change, your key ups, and your key downs, and matches are your to be visible, to equals to have been called. Now, there's many wrong things that you can do across the board. Let's take a look at it. The first one, right? testing library was not only created to test your code, but also to change the way in which you think about testing. It tries to move away from focusing on your implementation detail into how the user is actually going to use your application. So it moves away from trying to access things in the DOM in a way that a user would not access things in your DOM, right? No user is out there trying to get an element by ID or doing things like that. It's rather, they're just clicking on an input, clicking on a button, and all of that. Because we want to increase the confidence we have when we write our tests, that it actually tests what the user is going to experience, right? So in the past, we'll do something like this. Extract or destructure a container from render, and then when you do that, you start getting access to things like child, parent, get by, find by, all these elements. And then you're going to check that the class exists called main. Now this is going to be a problem because at a point in time where you decide to change that class, no longer to main, but maybe to container or wrapper or something like that, this test is going to fail. But for a reason not linked to the implementation, not linked to how the user is actually using your component. So we want to try and move away from that because it's going to make your life a living hell. Is that the right word? That's a little bit traumatic. But anyway, the next thing that you can do, or please not do, is use snapshots. Now, this is another controversial one because a lot of people like to use snapshots. And honestly, nothing against that. The problem about a snapshot is that it snapshots your DOM, right? So your document object model. And there's a lot of things that can change there, from white space to changing of classes, changing of elements, changing of all these things. At any point in time when you decide to not use a span but use a paragraph, your snapshot is going to fail. When you change a class name, your snapshot is going to fail. Every single time your test is going to fail for no reason related to how that thing actually functions. Right? If you care about the visual aspects of your component, use libraries like testing library. A good tool for you to use when you want to check if ever the elements are where you need them to be, because it takes a screenshot of what the user actually sees. And you can also have an offset of how it needs to contain. It doesn't necessarily have to contain all the time. Let's say you changed a header from a particular position and you shifted it maybe a little bit to the left or the right. So it can offset for like marginal differences and complain about big stuff, right? What I think you should do when you are testing elements in your component is something like this. This price 1, price 2, price 3, and the other ones I just don't care. Price 1. If you want to get an element in your DOM, use get by role. And the reason why I said that is because get by role not only ensures that the element is there, that the element is using semantic HTML, so the right HTML for that component, and also is accessible for things like screen readers and all of those things. You get that out of the box by just using get role. So I implore you that if you have to get anything in your HTML, try get it by role. And if you can't get by role, ask yourself, why can't I? Because that's usually a flag to tell you that there's something wrong with how you're building your HTML. Cool. And then the third price could be, and I find testing text on your browser quite hard. And one of the things that we get out of testing library is your get by text, right? But get by text is wide. You could get any text in your document element, your DOM element, right? It comes with another option, or second parameter, where you can say exact true, where you are looking, it will tell your testing library that I'm specifically looking for the same word, and I want the case to also be like this. So uppercase S with A, B, and E, right? So that creates a strict way for it to seek for that text. So if you have to, grab text like that, and when all else fails, like, I think one of the things that I found really hard to test is a loading spinner on your page, because sometimes we build this really with no role. When I was preparing this presentation, I realized that there's actually a role for a load spinner, and it's called status. So if you want to have a div that loads something, chances are you can put like a role to say status, meaning that you can use price number 1. But if you can't, then you can use test ID. Cool. Next one. In the world of selectors, query by. A lot of you might not be familiar with Jest, but as I mentioned, we've got get by, find by, and query by. Query by is specifically designed to check for things that are not in the DOM. And why this is important, or another way that I could write this rule is, don't use get by or find by to check for things that are not in the DOM. The reason of that is because the get by and the find by will show you an error when when you can't find something on the DOM, while the query by is just going to return a null. And it's easier then to assert that this null thing does not exist in your DOM, as opposed to it throwing an error and you having to find some weird assertion to assert that that thing is no longer in the DOM element. So only use query by if you are checking that something does not exist in the DOM. Cool. Next one, we are on events. If you started with the testing library a long time ago, I don't know when it was released, but I know that user event was released about 5 years ago. Most of your front end are probably using fire event to test for something that is being triggered on the browser. So fire event will dispatch a change event, a key up, a key down in isolation. 5 years ago, we came up with user event. And the reason is, user event is actually built on top of fire event, but it has some extra things on it. Fire event, when it dispatches, only dispatches a change event. While when user event dispatch not only dispatches a change event, but dispatches how the user is actually using your application. So it will dispatch your key up and your key down out of the box. So you don't have to consider those things. And if you ever decide, for whatever reason, you are actually listening on a key up instead of a change, then it will give you that out of the box. So Kent and myself implore you to use user event as opposed to fire event. Now, you'd see an S there at the top, meaning that it contributes to the speed of the test, but in this case, for fire event. Because fire event is a simpler version, right? It's only firing the change. It's a lot more faster than user event because the user event is doing all the bells and whistles. So, honestly, up to you. We are all very smart individuals. So use your insights, use your experiences to find the best solution for your organization, right? We implore you to use user event, but when you can't, fire event is still a good enough solution. Cool. Next one, matches. Waitfalls. So when I told you about how waitfalls are to test non-deterministic things, it's easier for us to do something like an empty waitfall, right? An empty waitfall basically allows for one async cycle to finish for you to assert something. The reason why this causes a flaky test is because today it's going to pass. First, it's going to pass in isolation, but it will create that problem where it will fail when we run it as a whole. Secondly, if you were to introduce another async call within whatever you are testing here, this is going to fail because it will only wait or have a set timeout for one of the async event, but won't cater for the next one. So be sure when you are using a wait for, and make sure that you know what you want to assert when that happens. So you're either asserting that something is visible, not visible, or something has been called. Cool. The other thing is putting an action inside of the wait for. Symingos wait for will trigger in two ways: when an async is done or a DOM manipulation has happened. This might run multiple times, right? And if you have an action inside of something that runs multiple times, as it polls your DOM whether or not something is visible, it's going to call that action multiple times and lead to things that you don't intend it for it to happen, because it might call the endpoint multiple times, or maybe make whatever it's making visible flicker because it's being called multiple times. So try to avoid putting an action inside of a wait for. So these are all don'ts. The opposites are the do's. All right. And then another one that we do, which is on the matcher side of things, is when you do a screen and get by role, what you are getting is a button that is of HTML element type, meaning that you have access to things like disable, you've got things like get attribute, you've got access to all these things. It's easier for us to expect that button.disable to be true, because this disable is going to return a boolean value, a boolean value, as opposed to actually using the matches already built in to help you check if ever a button is disabled. The problem with this is that if that button does not exist, you're going to get a vague error like can't find something on an undefined, as opposed to, hey, this button is actually not disabled, or this button is actually not in your DOM. So use the right matches for the job, period. I understand that it's lunchtime, and that is a lot for us to chew on. So we are only halfway, right? That was number 3, let's get to number 4. Number 4 is a very hard one. Number 4 is, how do you determine if ever something is wrong to test? Kent says, firstly, test that piece of a feature that you would try on the most if it were to break. Another way for me to say this is, if you are building something, you're building a feature, you have some insight about what's the important part about that feature. Test that thing first. Test the thing that you want to fail if anyone were to change it, right? And these are very high-level things that when you have some understanding of what you're trying to do and not just doing it because it's a ticket on the board, you start thinking about it and you start testing for those things to ensure that they work consistently. Another thing is conditionals. Conditional, if there's something in your front-end app that says, if this, do this, if this, do that, those conditionals are things that you want to test because you want something to break when that condition changes. If that was not good enough, here's a very famous diagram that I am not known for. Sandy Metz is a Ruby developer. She talks about what are the things that we should avoid testing. And then she introduces us to this diagram. I'm going to run through it quite quickly, but if you've got questions, let's talk after. So we have the concept of messages, which is what you see here on the side. A component either has an incoming, self-to-self, or outgoing message. And then we've got different types of messages. You either have a query or a command. So let me explain this. Incoming message is something coming into your component. So let's continue with our login in example. Your username, password, and a click of a button. Messages coming into your component. A self-to-self could be a validation. So when someone puts in an email, you are validating if ever that email is there or adheres to like email regulation. There's an @ all of those validations that we put in. That is a message that the component sends to itself to do the job. Then the last one is an outgoing message, which is from the component to the rest of the world, like calling in the database, an endpoint, or things like that. A query or a command. A query is when you are asking something and expecting a result back. A command is when you are sending something, it causes a side effect, but you don't care about the return. And an incoming, self-to-self, or outgoing message could either be a query, a command, or both. Are you with me? Cool. I want to take your attention to the purple stuff, and these are the things that you shouldn't test. That validation message we talk about is a self-to-self message. Don't test that. And the reason why I'm saying it is that chances are your positive or your negative case of a logging in component is inherently tested if you are testing, let's say like if the input shows an error message. Like when you're typing into an input, you show an error message at the bottom. You can test that, you show that error message. When you test that, you are inherently testing the private function that actually validates your email. If you are checking if that I send information to the backend and it winds up in the backend, it can't be correct if the email is incorrect. So you are inherently testing the validation message. There is no use for you to expose a private function like a validation message and testing that in isolation. Don't test it. An outgoing message, that is a query. So again, a query is when you go to somewhere and you're expecting a result back. And a simple example, continuing with our login example, would be, I've got the credential, I've got the passwords, I want to send it to our backend and find out if ever my user does exist in the database, and then you return the value back, right? So the thing that you care about is the data that just came back from the endpoint. We are in unit testing world. There's a good chance that you have mocked that endpoint. So what you are trying to assert back is something you put in so that you don't call the actual endpoint, right? So don't test that. It doesn't make sense for you to test that. So all else fails on the things that I said before, try and use this diagram to determine whether or not you should or shouldn't test something. Cool. Then we're number 5, not refactoring your tests. As I said that tests are code too. One of the things I like to do when we are refactoring our tests is bundle it up on something called a before each. A before each is a cesspool. I'm so sorry for this. Cesspool of bugs, right? Because there's a lot of things that you need to manage. Testing library out of the box comes with cleanup. It will clean up things like states and all of that for your component. But sometimes you need to reset timers, you need to reset hooks or reset mocks or reset something that you spied on because then you don't want to spy on it on anymore. So when you put something on a before each, it could cause issues that you need to spend hours trying to debug why. What I normally do is extract a utility function that does the things that I know all my tests require. So like the setup, maybe some action, like maybe all my tests require you to put in the input and click the button. I don't want to do that every single time I go to a test. So I can just bundle those 3 lines into a helper function and can reduce the size of my test. So if ever that's useful for you, try to do something like that. Another thing you need to avoid is destructuring selectors out of the render. Alright, right now this looks fine, but let's say you have an async flow here and you no longer want to use a get by role. You need to update that destructure to a find by role. Then next time you no longer want to find by role but want to find by text. Now you need to go and destructure a find by text. Things like that make your life miserable. What we suggest is just use screen. Screen will give you get by, find by, query by out of the box and makes the refactoring a whole lot easier. Now, practice makes perfect. I know that there's a lot of things that I've mentioned that very detailed focus on this particular libraries, but the more you do something, which whatever tool that you're using, because I genuinely believe that these things are transferable. It's not necessarily on this particular framework, but the 6 things that I mentioned are things that you can use in whichever platform that you're working with. The more you do something, the better you get at it. So much so that you start expecting it from all the other people that you work with. So when you are reviewing your code and doing all those things, you will start expecting them to do the same to ensure that your test and overall your code is a whole lot healthier. And if that doesn't work, it always is helpful to understand your libraries. This is very specific to Jest and maybe a lot of front-end frameworks, but substitute this with whatever framework, with whatever testing framework that you are using. Right? If you have issues about how your tests are configured, why your mocks are not working, why your spies are not working, look through Jest. When Jest starts up, it spools something called the JS DOM, which is a pure JavaScript implementation of the DOM. When you start having issues like web API problems, local host, or whatnot, when your tests are breaking, this is where you need to look at. Testing library, as I said, was initially built for React, but dubbed for all the other front-end frameworks, or at least the major 3. If you're having problems with your component not showing up, something about, for example, in React, you have to wrap your components in providers or some context for them to work. If you're having issues with things like that, this is where you need to start looking in your testing library layer. And if you have issues with your matches, Jest DOM is basically an extension of Jest for the DOM. It's right there. Sorry, that was not helpful. Because Jest can work on Node and the DOM, so it's not necessarily built to only test the DOM. They created Jest DOM that explicitly extends Jest to give you DOM-related assertions. So if you have things with assertions that are not working in your DOM element, this is the place in which you can look. Cool. So, hopefully that was not too much for you to find out. I'm almost done. How this breaks it. Hopefully that makes sense. Thank you so much for joining.
Okay, guys, did you enjoy the talk? Okay. Does anyone have questions? Remember, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Yes. Thank you.
You ready? That's cool. I want you to expand on something that you mentioned during your talk about how tests should be independent, because I don't think it's always immediately obvious to people who are new to testing that they shouldn't be independent. I've seen some juniors try to make them depend on each other in order to be efficient and write less code. Yes.
Yeah. First of all, you should always try to test. When you say unit, especially in front end, it's hard to always see where the unit part is, right? Because chances are your component is made out of like another like text component or button component and things like that. And you'd want to always bundle those things together. Unit testing is about try and find the most basic unit to test. And the reason why that is because you want to test that test as isolated as you possibly can test it. I think one of the experiences I had is when sometimes you are using portals and you're trying to do something here and there. And a testing library provides really and not me. But the aim that what I'm trying to get at is we mark because we are trying to isolate our tests so that we can find the most basic way to test our components. And so when you do that and put a describe and all of those things, you want to only test everything that that test does in isolation. You shouldn't not like try to link it with whatever the test that was there before or any test after that. It needs to be able to run alone when you actually execute it alone and run successfully as part of something else. I have a voice that kind of projects, so I'll still project. Yeah. Cool. And I think it's also for your sanity. And hopefully that I'm getting to responding to your question as well. When you try to build your tests linking to one another, that means that you should always try and run your test as a whole. Like you have to run your whole describe because now you've created some weird link between the test before and after. That doesn't make sense because the aim is unit test, basic unit, run it in isolation. So yeah, think about it now. Question? Oh, you can do that. No?
Hi, I wanted to ask if there are any tools or platforms that could help you identify these challenges if you're a developer, or you need to like actually get into testing in order to become a good developer because you will be able to identify what is wrong with your program or what you need to be fixing. You need to actually start with learning how to test, or is there like an AI route or a platform that simplifies the whole process for you?
That's such a good question. I've definitely experienced these woes because I spent a lot of time testing, which is why I get to learn the more you do it, the more it gets better. Um, but I think there's certain libraries that you can put in place. I've never tried them, but I think there's something I'm sure that has been built that checks if you care about these things, that you are using the right role or you are using the correct queries for the right job. I've never experienced them, but I think that there should be things similar to that. And I have Sheena here. We've talked about using open source AI for code reviews. And I think even though they are at the moment are very basic in terms of responding when we have like a pull request that uses things that are out of standard, right? There are AI things that you can put in the code review pipeline to check for rules that maybe your organization has set up, because they might not be really obvious out of the box, and also every organization is different, so you might care about different things. So setting up rules with these AI tools to be able to kick in during review time and tell you that you've got problems like this. Another one that we, I think Blackie talked about last week is Husky. Husky is a library that runs on your machine when you are creating a pull request. So it's a GitHub of some sort. And what that does is that as soon as you create a commit and try to push to like Git or whatever, it will run all your tests in your, like whatever you set up in your application. And if there's anything wrong, like it doesn't run as part of other tests or doesn't run in that whole test, it will probably show you at that point in time, because it will run all the tests and then they will fail, and then you will know that, okay, there's something that I've done wrong. So this needs to give you feedback, but not necessarily things that are specific to the problems that I've mentioned right now.
All right. Thank you so much, Rudy. Guys, can we give Rudy a round of applause? All right, guys. How was their first 2024?
Great.
We will see you guys in the next year. Okay. All right. For our next speaker, we have Rob McLean.